your seatbelt on.
3, 2, 1, go.
Some might think when you hit a road, it's for a paved destination. But for some of us, that road leads to dirt. Roadrunners chasing down the sun, kicking up dust. Just to witness Creator's glory, cutting through the horizon. You can have your pavement. We'll take the dirt. We want to be lost, so you can keep your final destination.
Guys, the DJI Ronin 4D-8K is finally here. I know it's been a long wait. I think one of the most exciting things about this is you're able to just swap out the head. So if you already have the 4D-6K, you could just buy the 8K head and put it on there. There's a lot of details and a lot of grounds that we got to cover when it comes to this new 8K sensor. So let's just get into it. I want to start with one of the most important things in my personal opinion, and that is we get these two new modes. There's a standard mode and then there's a dynamic range expansion mode. Standard mode is going to help with stuff like this. We're going to be whipping the camera around. We're doing off-road stuff. We're going to be sending it. You don't want any rolling shutter for stuff like that. So the standard mode, it looks maybe 4x better than the high dynamic range mode on this. We are shooting anamorphic 1.5x. Anamorphic is really bad for rolling shutter because it just really pushes the limits. It increases the rolling shutter. So we'll see how this holds up. Guys, we're in a really high contrast situation. We're in the standard mode because we were doing a lot of fast-paced, action-packed stuff. So standard mode, again, we get really fast readout. So there's almost no jello. There's some jello because we're shooting anamorphic. We're doing stuff like this. We're doing slower paced stuff where, you know, rolling shutter is not gonna be an issue. I'm gonna put it in the dynamic range expansion mode, and we're in ProBus 422HQ. So we're now getting 14-bit color, and we're increasing our dynamic range. Skin tones, everything's supposed to be better. On the 4D-6K, there was times where if you do any fast pans, you're gonna see all that jello and rolling shutter that's on that sensor. The standard mode just gives us a faster readout. So if you're doing any like fast-paced, high action type stuff, the standard mode is going to be your safe haven. That's the reason I set up this whole like Bronco spec ads, because I want to go as fast as possible and see how that rolling shutter will hold up. And as you guys saw, it looks pretty damn good. Guys, if you're enjoying this video, feel free to subscribe and hit that like button. And also stay tuned because I'll be doing a full BTS breakdown from this whole shoot. It was really fun and really dusty. The way that we have this camera rigged up, I will let Sam go into that on his video. Sam owns a 4D now, does like a lot of our car stuff, pretty much anything rigging. He was the first guy that I thought about because he does a lot of this car stuff. Sam's doing a video on it too. He's gonna go even more detailed, and his specific coverage is most likely gonna be more around stuff like this. And we were just thrashing this camera. It was crazy what we were putting this camera through, and it held up, and almost every single shot was super stable. There was only a couple of shots where we were hitting big bumps. You need a proper camera car with the whole arm and everything on it. But probably like 90% of the shots were all usable, which is freaking crazy. And then when that dynamic range expansion mode comes into play is, for instance, that spec commercial, you know, we had a lot of fast-paced stuff, but then I wanted to involve some story. When it came time to do the sunset shots, you know, we were really pushing it. You're in the desert, so you get like this crispy, almost stilly gray type blue, and then the sun's just kind of piercing through the horizon, and the contrast is kind of gross. And so you need a camera that can hold up to that. So in the dynamic range expansion mode, we're getting 14.7 stops of dynamic range. So obviously that came into play when we're doing those dynamic crane type shots where there's not as much movement. It's more about the storytelling. But that will lead me into the second point, is all the color fidelity and all the dynamic range that we're getting out of this. We actually had a red Komodo X on set with Armando, and he pretty much shot everything that we were shooting. And a few of those clips did make it into the video. And I don't think no one's gonna be able to tell what camera was the 4D-8K and the red Komodo X. We even compared this 8K sensor to the 6K sensor version. And the color that's coming out of this is just insane. When DJI sent me all the specs, they go into how it's supposed to like mimic film and all that. I don't know about all that stuff, but what I do know is compared to the 6K, the way that it holds skin tones throughout the dynamic range, it's far superior than the 6K sensor is crazy. So when you go into post and you really try to stretch that image, the skin tones are gonna hold up way better on this 8K sensor. That will lead me to the next point now, and let's talk about resolution. The biggest things about this is we only have ProRes RAW, ProRes HQ, and H.264. If you're someone that really wants that ProRes LQ, stick with the 6K. The reason they're doing that, again, the 8K head is more for production type stuff, but you'll see the whole reason that they're doing that is because there's way more just data and color information being pumped out of the sensor. This is the 6K 4D right here. And what's really cool is obviously, if you want to shoot in the full frame, full readout, we're stuck at 48 frames per second. If you want 60 frames per second, it's going to put you into a crop. On the 8K, when you're in 8K mode on this, we don't get 60. But if we go and put this into 4K mode, you'll see we go all the way to 60 now, and it doesn't do any crops. So you basically get full sensor readout with 60 frames per second on here. When you're in 8K ProRes 422 HQ, max frame rate is 30 frames per second, 2997. Very strange. It won't let you go above that if you try. Obviously, it's going to tell us to change our resolution. But if we go to ProRes RAW, we can then go to 60. So finally, we get the similar crop that we get in the 6K. When the 6K tries to do 60 frames per second and it's full readout, 75 frames per second goes into the similar crop. If you're trying to do 422 HQ and 8K, 30 frames per second is your max. If you go to 4K, you do 60 frames per second max, and that's downsample for the 8K. If you go above the 60 frames per second in the 4K, it goes off of the downsample. So I don't know if it's doing pixel bending or line skipping, they didn't tell me. So we have an 8K mode, we have a 4K mode that could be downsampled from the 8K, and then we have a Super 35 mode, and everything changes from there. This camera is more aimed at higher end productions and more commercial units and film productions. So all the formats and resolutions that we get on here are just ProRes HQ, H.264, and ProRes RAW. And the standard readout mode, again, not in the dynamic range expansion mode, our base ISOs are 320 and 1600. And then when you go into the dynamic range expansion mode, we're getting ISO 800 and ISO 4000. Now, once again, we put this up against the 6K sensor. And what was weird is when we were exposing from the back of the screen, the exposures were always darker on the 8K sensor. When we first were looking at that, we're like, oh, does that mean like we're not getting as much like light performance? No, and in reality, once you bring that footage into post, you're able to kind of push the exposure even more. And so in post, you have a lot more lift in there. So you have a lot more shadow details that you get to save. So we really are getting more dynamic range out of this. And again, the key point for me was the skin tones, the way that you could bring all the skin tones back and it holds all the colors on there versus the 6K. If you're trying to bring up the skin tones in a really crunchy dynamic range scenario, you know, the 6K sensor is still amazing, but the 8K, you're going to have a lot more latitude there. And one super cool thing is we now have a low pass filter built into this. Previously with the 6K, there's no low pass filter, so you might get some moiraying issues, and low pass filters are also supposed to help with skin tone. And it just goes to show like this is a powerhouse camera and it's able to keep up with the Red Komodo X shooting in its raw format. What's crazy is in the standard mode, we're getting 12-bit color just internally on this. So not 10-bit, we're getting 12-bit. And then when you go into that dynamic range expansion mode, we're getting 14-bit color. So in the dynamic range expansion mode, we're getting 14.7 stops of dynamic range. We all know when it comes to testing dynamic range, it could be anywhere and everywhere. Personally, from my experience from shooting with other cameras, the dynamic range that's coming off this camera is insane. Again, I was super impressed with the 6K and the image that you're getting out of there. And so this is your first time using 4D, right?
This is my very first time.
Yours too. Yeah, first time using it in this kind of scenario.
Also, guys, Tucker owns Element Filters. I include it in my Red Komodo X video because they're IR blocking. So I'll put a link to all that in the description. We just did a shot, and it's like a shot, like we were just saying, requires, you know, would you use a jib or something like that. So what do you guys like?
Yeah, I would have normally used probably ready rig with the arms with the Ronin 2, but again, just this two side handle action, and we got him pulling off the monitor, and we were able to get the same looking shot. It was insane. Yeah. Probably again one of the like most favorites shots I've ever taken, and it's on this thing. Yeah. And my first time using it.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's pretty. He had to get kind of used to like the algorithm of how the Z-axis kind of goes.
Yeah.
But once you got used to it, you're like, oh, it's like
Yeah.
not that bad.
You have to anticipate it a little bit, but again, you get used to it, you see how it functions, you get a feel for it, and then you don't fight it, you just go with it, and
Yeah.
it looks
After
great.
a few takes, it's
Yeah.
get it in the bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got the money shot.
And it's, again, ProRes RAW, ProRes 422 HQ, 12-inch and 14-bit color, ready for production shit. It's pretty crazy.
That you can put like any type of lens on
Yeah,
there?
having the anamorphic glass on there is pretty sweet.
Well, it's limited on weight. It takes 1,100 grams. This lens is 740. This adapter is 170 grams.
Got it.
So this doesn't even actually balance on here. Like if we kill the motors real quick, so you guys see, it's way front heavy. But once you turn it on, the motors are powerful enough to run it. I don't recommend to do that, but we're doing it. Mercury's, I tried Mercury's, a little bit too heavy, but I'm gonna try it with this Nissi adapter now. Also shout out to Nissi for sending me out this PL to DX mount. It goes directly on there. That's why I'm able to use this lens. But just imagine like if you need to shoot car stuff, dirt bike shit, like you could just stand outside the truck.
Yeah.
Like if you guys, you know, run a gun, like we could have done today, honestly.
The running stuff we were doing earlier.
Yeah.
It's just literally
Yeah.
like this and running straight on.
This is why he's caked in dirt, guys. Because
Cut to it. Cut to it.
yeah.
It's also sick that you can use it just like you can lock the arm to shoot normal handheld.
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
then you can use the arm to shoot like gimbal shots.
Yeah.
And it's like a super,
And
it's
this-
super efficient.
This comes with all this, basically. I think there's a couple pieces you might have to add on, but this is all built to be used as one unit. So you're not fumbling around gimbals and extra cables and counterweights and all this stuff.
So the only thing like that's like aftermarket or not
This-
DJI is the mount and the lens?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
But
okay.
you could do native E mount with autofocus,
Oh, wow.
DL, L mount. So all these, like the lenses we're using on the FX3 right now, we use on this, and it has autofocus. So guys, if you're to get a camera with similar image quality and a gimbal, all your external monitors, your wireless setup, your control units, and have to set it up and all that, you're most likely going to spend just as much or even more. And there's multiple kits you're basically bringing together, and you're fumbling around, takes forever to set it up. This thing, we just showed up to here on location, turned it on, it's ready to go. So some people might say like, oh, that's too expensive for a camera. If you go and buy all the shit that you need to shoot the same quality on the other system, it's going to be more. So that's the other thing that people aren't realizing. So again, who is this camera for? Anybody trying to do virtual effects, anyone doing any high-end productions, any commercial units. Like if you're on that level, I think this is what this 8K sensor's for. But obviously, if you're someone like me who's more of like an independent filmmaker and you're doing, you know, things that are starting to branch over into the more commercial world or into the film world and film festivals and you're just all over the place, I think this is obviously could be a great option for you. Outside of that, pretty much everything else with the camera is exactly the same as the 6K version. We still have the same 9 stops of ND, the same performance from the gimbal head, the Z-axis. Everything else is exactly the same. It's just, you know, we're getting more image quality getting pumped out of this. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, go check out Sam's video. He's going to go even more in depth on certain topics when it comes to like car rigging. And so I'll make sure to put a link down in the description for that. I do have LUTs available for this camera as well. For the film, I used a mix of those and a mix of film emulation. It was kind of like all over the place depending what the shot was. I did some pretty intense color grading on those. There's a lot of windows. There's a lot of like added motion blur, a lot of just like dynamic range being stretched and expanded just because the image we're getting out of this, it's really hard to break it. So I had a lot of fun color grading this. I don't know if you guys can hear, but my dog's snoring in the background. So I think that's my cue to go. So yeah, guys, peace.